Hi, Bill. What's keeping you busy this Friday afternoon?
Well, I came back this morning from my weekly taping of the Liberal Oasis radio show, and this week I had on one of the bloggers at bleedingheartland.com, an Iowa blog. Spoke to Des Moines Dem.
I bet they're super tired of political ads on television.
You know, I didn't talk about the ads so much, but I wanted to get a sense of, because from outside the state, all I hear from CNN and the like is debates over change versus experience and who attacked who and the various horse race numbers. And I wanted to get a sense of what issues the Iowa voters are actually focusing on and using to assess the candidates. And I was happily affirmed that they are thinking about issues. They don't care about all these things that we hear in the traditional media, but they are a little, I think, frustrated, perhaps. I don't want to put words in her mouth, but there isn't a great sense of where the candidates are on key positions, where the distinctions are, since that voters need to do their own homework more.
Well, correct me if I'm wrong. I remember from my blogometer days that Des Moines Dem is an Edwards supporter.
She is. And she was very candid about that, but she's also very good at giving objective analysis of where things stood. And so she found the race very fluid right now because people don't have a good sense of where the candidates stand on the issues that they care about.
Fair enough. But, one thing we do know better now is what Mike Huckabee knows about the NIE, which is apparently nothing.
I thought he finally got boned up on it.
He did, but the damage was already done. But we can touch on that. Of course, the NIE, I think it broke Sunday night, right? It first started hitting the blogs a week ago, right?
I thought it was Tuesday.
Was it Tuesday?
There's so much news. Everything's a blur.
We're just
But
drowning
Bush's
in it.
press conference was Wednesday.
The press conference was Wednesday, but when did the
I thought it was the day before the news broke.
Okay. Whatever it was, we had a full week of reaction to sift through for Blogging Heads viewers here.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but I would think that the reaction from the liberal blogosphere and the conservative blogosphere very different.
I don't know. Yes and no. I mean, I was reading a Kevin Drum take on it, and at the top of the post, he said, "Oh, of course the right wingers, are going crazy over this, blah blah blah." But when you get to the bottom, and what his conclusions were, basically that they still have a civilian program. They probably have the science to do so, but they're not trying to create a weapon right now, and so we need to keep monitoring the situation. Which, there are a whole bunch of other things that conservatives are stressing, but that is pretty much their takeaway, too.
I'm sorry, my cell phone was buzzing in my ears. I had to turn it off.
Oh, okay.
I missed part of what you had to say there.
Oh, basically that, at the end of the day, the takeaways that Drum had were a lot of the same takeaways that the conservatives had. I mean, they, of course, are much more skeptical about the findings. But,
well, that was my sense, that there was not a lot of acceptance in the conservative blogosphere and what seemingly is their patron saint, John Bolton, that the intelligence estimate itself was inherently flawed. That this was part of the mushy-headed thinking from State Department folks and their ilk. Fred Thompson was pushing the notion that this was disinformation from the Iranians, and so it didn't cause any kind of shift in foreign policy outlook on the right.
Well, I mean, what you mean by foreign policy outlook? I mean, they were definitely skeptical of it, and the very quick reaction was, this isn't any type of new information, or they wanted to know what the new information was, and they were immediately skeptical of motives. And the motive that everyone points to, and I think is still credible, is that there were, elements within the intelligence community that wanted to handcuff President Bush to make sure that Bush, had, no justification at all to go ahead and bomb Iran before the end of his term. And so there was, definitely deep-seated skepticism about what the intentions of the report were. But, despite what, Kevin Drum and the Marcos of the world think, there wasn't a big, huge, drumbeat for bombing within the conservative blogosphere to begin with. I mean, you know, I watch Chris Matthews pretty much every night because, again, I have a problem. But, you know, he's constantly, oh, he's so worried about the bombing. I never was, and I just always struck me that bombing was so much more Clintonian. You know, a big part of the Bush foreign policy is to reject everything Clinton. And, you know, bombing Iraq repeatedly was a big part of the Clinton administration in the latter half of his term. And I think when 9/11 happened, I was one of the conservatives that thought, oh, yeah, Bush is definitely going to invade Iraq. And part of the reason I made that guess was because, you know, something limited like bombing was just not Bush's style. It was too, like I said, Clintonian to do kind of more limited thing like that. And I think when you read closer at the corner and you look at the people like Victor Davis Hanson, etc., you know, they were never really for bombing, and I don't think there was a strong consensus. I mean, plus there was really never any plan, like, you know, what do you bomb, etc. So
well, I wouldn't say. I mean, take Hanson in particular.
Yeah,
he will say that he was never for bombing, but he'll also have had posts earlier that talked about vague notions of military action across the border. Michael Ledeen, in the same way, who blogs for Pajamas Media and his blog, you know, Faster Please is the title of his blog, clearly implying please speed up confrontation with Iran, and he'll allude to it in other posts, but since he doesn't explicitly say bombing, he is allowed to wriggle out and say, hey, I was never for this in the first place. But I think if you read between the lines of a lot of his posts, it's not like he was advocating some grand bargain diplomatic maneuver with Iran either.
Well, I will definitely say this. There is definitely a strong consensus in the conservative blogosphere for confronting Iran on their involvement in Iraq. There's no doubt about that. And I think when you talk about Victor Davis Hanson signing off on excursions into Iran for that purpose, there's definitely sentiment for that. But I think that's far different than a, you know, heavy bombing campaign looking for facilities which apparently from this report we don't know, you know, where they are. Well,
even on, you know, folks at the Weekly Standard, like Rural Mark Garrick, if I'm pronouncing his name correctly, you know, the big neocon theory was not massive carpet bombing campaign. It was a few surgical strikes that were not really intended to wipe out a nuclear program, but the thinking would be that it would spark glorious people-powered revolution once the bombs came and throw the mullahs out. Logic that completely escapes me, but it never was. There never was an attempt for a carpet bombing campaign. And when I read conservative bloggers like Hanson and Ledeen speaking in this kind of semi-cryptic double talk about bombing, it comes across to me, and I think most liberal bloggers, that they clearly want confrontation. They clearly want to poo-poo any kind of diplomatic outreach. They talk about Iran as being utterly irrational, coming of the 12th Imam, hell-bent on bringing about apocalypse, doing everything they can to block up any avenue of diplomacy and make it seem foolish and silly, without coming right out and saying flat out, I want to bomb Iran today, and talk about things that would raise the level of confrontation up. Okay, let's skirmish on the border a little bit about what's going on in Iraq, clearly in hopes of hoping that confrontation escalating, thinking that it's inevitable. Well, so when I hear their skepticism about this intelligence report, I put it squarely in the context of they would really like to have confrontation with Iran sooner rather than later, faster please, in Ledeen's wording, and are clearly disappointed that this report is going to set that back.
Well, there were also some quick takeaways from conservatives taking parts of the report that they liked. You know, first of all, many of them were quick to point out that, you know, the NIU report confirmed that despite their objections publicly, Iran had a program through 2003. So at least we're all in agreement of that, which automatically makes them, you know, nuclear non-proliferation treaty violators right there. Second of all, which they cutely point out, is that, you know, the date of the switch, which the report doesn't say, you know, why they switched, but it gives this vague assurance that there was some cost-benefit analysis done by Iranians as to whether or not they should pursue the program. And, of course, this happens in 2003. So conservative bloggers, you know, cutely then ask, you know, what exactly was happening in 2003 around the world, or maybe right next door, that made the Iranians say, maybe not this nuclear program isn't a good idea. The answer, of course, being the Iraq invasion, and they then point to the fact that Libya that same year, or maybe it was early 2004, then also abandoned their nuclear hopes after the Iraq invasion, and so for them it's another ex post rationalization for the Iraq War, saying, we invaded, we showed we had the will, to enforce these things, and it apparently changed the Iranians' mind as to whether or not this program was really worth it.
You can cherry pick aspects of the report to try to fit through preconceived notions that you have. What I find striking about this is the conservative charge against liberals when it comes to foreign policy is that liberals can't see reality for what it is. They have their heads in the sand. They have their dewy-eyed ideals, which don't make sense the way the world really works. But when evidence is brought forth that doesn't jibe with the conservative worldview, and I think there's been much of that over the course of the past 6 years, this report just being the latest, there is a fundamental policy recommendation in the NIE. I mean, and all the points that you were saying about the timing of the suspension of the weapons program, that's in the report, sure. But what the report also says is it's their assessment that a credible diplomatic outreach would fundamentally solve whatever remaining nuclear issues that we have with Iran.
Yeah,
that's being credible.
That's
that part of it is always going to be washed away because it doesn't jibe with what the conservative sense of dealing with these types of states are.
Yeah, but a recommendation is not a fact or even really a kind of evidence. One of the corner posters did a great job.
But it's their intelligence assessment that would actually be a workable approach. And they didn't say definitively that it would definitely work.
It's an opinion.
But it's their sense that it could work and worth trying.
I mean, the laptop that they found in 2004 that originally started the 2005 report.
I think there's a lot of dispute about the nature of that laptop, if I recall.
Right, but at least that's like something to point to as evidence. It's not some analyst's opinion. I mean, there was a post at the corner that detailed the many different leaks as to what is the specific information that the intelligence community gained that changed the assessment. And the New York Times, the Washington Post, the USA Today all had different leaking information as to what it was. So it's very unclear as to what actual evidence there is that is new that changed the assessment. There's obviously something, but to say that we know exactly what that is, I don't think there's a definitive answer.
Well, I don't think I do know exactly what it is that made the intelligence community change its mind. We've seen some reporting on it.
Contradictory.
Yeah, but the bottom line to me is you have, my tax dollars and your tax dollars paid for 60 intelligence agencies. Some of this intelligence was around within the administration last year, reported by Seymour Hersh in The New Yorker. The White House, and Cheney in particular, tried to bat that down and ended up stalling this report for a year. Again, instead of accepting the evidence that was given, the classified evidence that was given to them, they tried to reject it and push back on it. We just saw today, Think Progress flagged this from Pat Lang, who's former CIA and also a blogger, that there were people in the intelligence community that are ready to go public with this can risk jail time because they were so frustrated that this information was being squelched, and that was a reason why this actually rose to the surface. So, to reiterate my point, within the White House, and more importantly for our discussion, conservative bloggers, how are they reacting to this? I see a pattern of cherry-picking evidence and taking it out of context instead of taking everything as a whole and seeing the world for as it is and basing policies on that. And I would think that this episode is not only going to hurt, Bush in particular, for saber-rattling a few weeks ago when he should have known better because his stuff was available to him. It's making conservative bloggers seem farther and farther out of touch with the world as it is in actual reality. But I don't see a concern amongst conservative bloggers about that. They seem very happy to maintain the narratives they've created for themselves, but I think they're pulling themselves away from mainstream discourse at this point.
Well, I have 2 points in that. One, I think there's definitely trepidation in the conservative blogosphere about what Bush knew and when he knew it, as far as revamping up his rhetoric. But 2, I think you're fundamentally wrong on the what the narrative they're trying to create is coming out of this. I don't think it is that they're taking everything out of context and moving them farther away from the public. Because when you look at what the Jonah Goldberg, Victor Hansen are saying, it is essentially that this is what we know now is that they have the technology. There's not that much different from civilian and military technology when it comes to developing the science. They at one point had the intent. They've decided not to at this point, and that we need to be vigilant and keep up the pressure on them to make sure that they understand that they should not go ahead and pursue this. I think what we're looking at here is the Bush administration right now is going ahead and trying to push for a new round of sanctions from Europe and the rest of the global community. And it seems to me that is the course that conservatives are pushing, which doesn't seem to me all that outside the mainstream.
Well, I guess where I'd quibble at it seemed we probably don't want to stay on this topic for the entire part of the segment, I assume.
Yes, this will be the last point. Then we'll move on to Romney.
Conservatives seem to reject direct negotiations with Iran.
Yes.
Conservatives won't explicitly say that they want the bombing to start now. They seem to be frustrated with what's going on and are concerned what's happening in the future, yet they're not proposing anything different from what is currently happening. They seem to be saying this sort of half-assed diplomacy, which clearly Iran doesn't see as credible, and that is emphasized implicitly emphasized in the NAE report. If this is really bothering you, and you don't want to see a military confrontation happen, wouldn't you propose some change in the diplomatic strategy based on the new evidence that's come to light? And I'm just not seeing that, which makes me very skeptical that there is a sincere concern on the conservative blogosphere, as well as those otherwise in the conservative movement, that they want to avoid a military confrontation.
Well, I don't think we're going to change anyone's mind as to whether or not they believe conservatives are either are or not secretly wanting to bomb. So we'll move on to the Mittster and his Thursday speech on Mormonism.
Also, wildly different reactions, I think, in the liberal and conservative blogospheres, but I think different than the NIE. I think there are wildly different reactions within the conservative blogosphere.
There are. Well, first, not only were there wildly different reactions, positive and negative, but to me there were also 2 kinds of posts on the subject, which kind of lead me to a larger point, which I may have talked to before. The 2 kinds of posts are, how I felt about the speech, meaning, how I, Jonah Goldberg, how I, you Hewitt, how I, Catherine Lopez, felt about the street. And then the second kind of post was, these are the evangelicals that I know, and what I'm hearing from, this is how they felt about the speech. Which leads me to a larger point, which is there is a huge gulf in the conservative movement, the conservative blogosphere, between the conservative blogosphere and the more social conservative evangelical movement. I actually got into trouble very early on in my tenure as the blogometer when I made a spotlight pointing out that of the major conservative bloggers at the time, they were, 5 out of 7 of them were either ambivalent or for gay marriage. And Hugh Hewitt got really upset with me at the time. But I went on a show and just invited everyone to, look at the posts, look at who I cited. I'm thinking of, Glenn Reynolds here, the Powerline guys don't care about it, Little Green Footballs doesn't care about it. And then during the Family Research Council Values Voter Summit, Joe Carter, who writes the Evangelical Outpost and is actually now working for Huckabee, had a post where he talked about basically what I was saying, is that there's a huge gulf between, what the conservative blogosphere cares about and what the social conservative base cares about. And so I think you saw that with the reaction to Romney, is that everyone who watched this feed, of course, either liked it or didn't like it, and bloggers will, of course, tell you what's on their mind. But they also felt the need to then go and say, oh, here are some, social conservative evangelical people I know, and here's what they thought.
Is this speech and is the growing friction between the Romney and the Huckabee campaigns? When I went to CPAC last year, the mantra is always, I think I might have mentioned this in the previous segment, the mantra is the conservative movement needs the economic conservatives and the social conservatives.
Yeah, that's Romney's whole three legs thing.
Right. Is this, and Romney is clearly trying to bring that together in his speech. Looking at the blogosphere, it seems like those divisions are surfacing more in the discussion of this.
I think it's more germane to when we start talking about Huckabee. I think Romney has his own set of issues. Along with the whole flip-flopping thing, there's more and more of a sense, not even more. It's a long-standing sense of how authentic is Romney, and I think when it comes to this Mormon speech, there's a sense of for the people that didn't like it, and let me first say there were lots and lots of conservative bloggers who did. Hugh Hewitt, Catherine Lopez.
And Hewitt's post in particular was very interesting.
Well, let's be upfront about Hugh. Hugh's been, he wrote the Book of Mormon in the White House. Hugh's been a strong Romney supporter from the beginning. So his liking of the speech is not exactly a news flash.
But his saying that anyone who doesn't acknowledge the majesty of this speech is not a serious or legitimate analyst and should be disregarded.
That includes his good friends David Frum and Ramesh Purnuru, who neither of whom liked the speech.
Right, and I saw on some other posts, I think Red State in particular, that I sensed some mockery towards Hewitt in regards to.
Oh yeah, well, the Red Staters have been less than fans of Mitt for a while now, and there is definitely tension between Red State and Hugh about Hugh's very pro-Romney stance. So that's an ongoing little skirmish on the right there.
Gotcha.
But yeah, I don't want to sell Mitt short. Rush Limbaugh was a fan of the speech. Bill Bennett, Cato Byrne. He definitely had his I don't want to call them converts. Definitely people that thought he did well in the speech and that it would help him.
Is there an underlying element to that within both these pundits as well as in the bloggers, a dislike of Huckabee and a gravitating sort of trying to find the positive to say about Romney's speech because they want Romney to beat Huckabee in Iowa?
No, I don't. If any of the people I named, I don't think any of them are that concerned about Romney-Huckabee in Iowa. Of the people that I named, none of them are big Huckabee fans. But I don't think they're thinking that far ahead, or they're basing their opinions on Mitt on just Iowa. I could be wrong. Ramesh has never been a Romney fan, so it's not surprised he was not a big fan of the speech. But Ramesh is no Huckabee fan either. But he's also not a Giuliani fan. There's not a lot of people Ramesh likes in the field, except for McCain. But yeah, we said this last week. There's just really no one, the conservatives bloggers are keen around at this point. Did you want to go into the left's critique of Romney's speech?
Yeah, there's sort of two different ones that I noticed. One I think might be the more obvious one, a sense that Romney's attempts to emulate JFK and directly compare himself to John F. Kennedy's address in 1960 to Protestant ministers about potentially being the first Catholic president were hypocritical and contradictory. Steve Bennett of the Carpetbagger Report said this was really the anti-JFK speech. It was not a proud embrace of separation of church and state. He had a lip service towards it, but then sought to blur it as much as possible and the rest of it. A sense that it's fine if you're from different faith backgrounds as long as you believe in Jesus Christ. I think that was Atrios' comment. But also there was an interesting take by Pastor Dan at Street Prophets, which is one of the big religious liberal blogs. And he was sort of keying off David Brooks's column from the Times. And he said what Romney was sort of doing was engaging in faithiness, as similar to Stephen Colbert's truthiness.
Right.
A sense that you're halfway saying faith is really important, but I'm not going to talk about my faith.
Yeah, I think Brooks had a great line. He said something along the lines of, if Romney's just saying that all these faiths are the same and all that matters is, that you just have one of them, why not just pick the one with the coolest buildings?
Right. And this is always the problem once religion and politics collide, where you draw the line always gets very awkward, which is why it's a whole lot safer for politicians to stay out of it, because there's just a lot of minefields there. And in the attempts that Romney was doing this, and this also segues in, I think, what Byron York blogged about on the Corner, that there were some quote-unquote dog whistle lines to appeal to Christian evangelicals.
Definitely.
There was also little dog whistles to his fellow Mormons. For example, he has a line in there saying that I believe that Jesus Christ is the Savior of mankind, which one in itself is strange. He just said that faith isn't important to him. Faith, his personal doctrines should not be relevant to his presidential run. Yet it's important that he says that he believes in Jesus Christ. So right away, you got an inherent contradiction there. But in saying Savior of mankind, instead of, which you might traditionally hear from a conservative Christian, Jesus Christ is my personal Savior.
Right.
That speaks to his Mormon beliefs. Mormons don't believe in original sin. Mormons don't believe that there was original sin in what happened with Adam in the Garden of Eden. So Jesus can't have died for original sin, if that's the case. So they talk about Jesus in more of a macro sense, being a savior of mankind.
What is he saving them from them, if not original sin?
It's a little fuzzy, because again, there's a sense of atonement for all of society and the flaws of society, but there isn't the same sense that your personal sins are washed away by the crucifixion of Jesus. So this is the kind of theological dispute that has no place in a presidential campaign, but Romney has to wade into it to some degree, because clearly there's a constituency within the Republican Party and the conservative movement where this is a major issue, and so he's trying to find a way to gloss over it, and he's hoping that no one notices that he's not saying that Jesus Christ is my personal Savior. And that's I did sense there was a lot of initial positivity from evangelicals in reaction to the speech. I think, it's hard to fully know, but I do wonder, once the speech kind of settles in, if these same kinds of concerns, I think wholly unfounded concerns, irrelevant concerns, that if this person doesn't share my exact theology, he doesn't belong in the White House, I wonder if those things are still going to pop up.
I'll touch on that just for a second. I don't think there's any, and I forget where I read this, it was probably the Corner. I don't think there's any specific concern that evangelicals have that there's some type of policy that Romney will adopt as president that threatens them or promotes Mormonism. Their main underlying concern is that Romney, as a Mormon in the White House, will give a credence and legitimacy to Mormonism that that they don't feel it deserves.
Seems to be sort of a distinction without a difference.
Well, one's more of like, what government will actually do, and one of them is just, the fact that it would kind of legitimize it.
If that's the issue, I think it speaks to sort of the general weirdness of the Republican primary right now. This dispute between evangelical Christians and Mormons is so far removed from what most voters are looking at and wanting from their leaders right now. And so the fact that he had to wade into it in this, when JFK addressed the Protestant ministers, he made a very bold proclamation in the absolute separation of church and state. He even went as far as to say that there should be no money from the government going to any religious institution whatsoever. And he faced those guys in the eye and told
I guess
them.
what I'm trying to say, to make the distinction with JFK, is that there was some, unfounded concern at the time that with the Catholic that was president, he would somehow give more credence to what, the Pope would say. And so there was a worry that, he would be, interacting and changing U.S. policy in a way that, would somehow the Catholic Church had an influence over. And that it's a very different concern with evangelicals and Mormons. There's no worry that, Romney's going to have the elders on a phone asking what he should do about X, Y, or Z. It's more of, legitimizing Mormonism, whereas, Catholicism was always a very legitimate religion to have in America. So I think that's the distinction there.
I think that's totally true. But I think, JFK was facing bigotry. He looked it right in the eye, and he addressed it forthright, and tried to advance and close a source of dissension in the country, and did it rather successfully. So he wasn't. So in one sense, he was speaking directly to a group of Protestant ministers, but he was also speaking to the rest of the country and trying to get us past religious divisions in the country. Romney, it seems to me, was strictly pandering and trying to alleviate a certain constituency, and that's it. There was nothing in the speech that I think successfully spoke to larger themes, and I think that it's exposing the inherent difficulties of excessive melding of religion and politics, even though obviously, people of faith have full rights as citizens as people who aren't of faith, obviously. But beyond that, Romney's getting himself very mired into a theological dispute, I think. And he may be able to get out of it because his competition is somewhat weak. But
I'll just close and move on to Huckabee. But David Frum made a very similar point. He didn't mention JFK, but he said Romney could have given a very good speech that talked about the common American values that we all share, and ended it there. But instead, he went even further and started talking about these faith communities that Frum had a very like you do thought it was more of a closer to pandering than an opportunity to really talk about common American values. But we can now move on to Huckabee, who I can pretty accurately report is widely not liked in the conservative blogosphere.
Well, there are Huckabee bloggers, I assume.
Well, not many. The man I mentioned earlier, Joe Carter, who wrote for Evangelical Outpost, actually kind of a good way to tell the story of the race is that for a long time, Joe Carter was one of the people early on that was doing the kind of blogger drumbeat for Fred Thompson. And he became disillusioned with Thompson's campaign and then went on to endorse Huckabee and now has stopped blogging at Evangelical Outpost and is now a full-time blogger for the Huckabee campaign. And you can see him correcting Jim Garrity on stuff and engaging for bloggers, getting Huckabee's message out there. So I think when you see Thompson's cratering and Huckabee's rise, I think those are directly related. Is that I don't think there's anything special going on with Huckabee right now that's leading him to a surge. It's more of like the social conservatives that were always going to be wary of Romney, that were never going to sign off on Giuliani, were looking around for somebody, and for a long time it was maybe Brownback, maybe Huckabee. Ooh, there's this Thompson guy. And then now that Brownback has dropped out and that Thompson has become the clearly not the answer, they're all starting to coalesce around Huckabee as their man.
Well, to get with your earlier point, the lack of love that he's getting from the conservative blogosphere, he's even got banged around, I think, from both sides of the blogosphere this week.
Oh, yeah. Where do you want to start?
What's up?
I said, what issue do you want to start with?
Well, I think it was an interesting development for the rise of new liberal media. His role in the Wayne Dumond parole, the convicted rapist who later murdered after being paroled.
So the very quick story: the Arkansas parole board allowed a rapist to go free and he ended up traveling to Missouri and killing a woman.
And the parole board was directly pressured by Huckabee. And this story's been around for a while. Atrios had blogged about it months ago.
Let me just say that, of course, that Huckabee disputes the fact that he pressured the board to release him, but in a very telling move, pretty much all the conservative bloggers are siding with, the Huffington Post and Murray Wass, the Washington Journal, saying, "Oh no, we think Huckabee tried to get this guy off."
Well, I don't think the facts are very disputable.
Huckabee does.
I know Huckabee does, but his words are on the page. He can't really directly refute what he wrote on paper. I mean, you can say that, hey, I wasn't the guy who literally let him out because I don't sit on the parole board. That's the extent of the argument that he has. I mean, there's no doubt.
Oh, no, but then there are some other, disputes about whether he was not at a meeting or he personally pressured some board members. And I think there's Brian Ross had some people at the parole board coming forward saying, no, he did pressure me. So there is, some dispute as to how much, personal lobbying beyond that just simple statement he made.
So even though this has been kicking around in the liberal blogosphere driven by Atrios months ago, it didn't get picked up by mainstream media because Huckabee was considered an also-ran.
Right.
Now, of course,
he was not terribly relevant.
Right. Now, of course, he's a front runner and everything is considered fair game in the eyes of traditional media. And so when Murray Wass, who was an independent investigative journalist that did a whole lot of spade work on the Valerie Plame case, dropped a big story in the Huffington Post, which is now one of the bigger engines, I'd say, in online liberal media. Although it's not always partisan. It had several anti-Edwards pieces earlier this cycle. That in and of itself had a massive ripple effect where the traditional media glommed onto it and ran with it, right away. I think it's a real question whether this might have gone out there if there wasn't a true blue liberal media on the scene, as there wasn't in recent years.
I don't know. He has plenty of enemies over at the American Spectator. I know Quinn Hillier was quick to have a bunch of Arkansas-connected people, taking Huckabee down on this matter. I don't know about the timing of it, but there was enough antipathy in the conservative blogosphere on different sites like the American Spectator blog. We can always speculate whether or not it would have come out, but.
Well, that's a fair point. I mean, I think independent, conservative media has had a great run, and so that those institutions are very well built up. And so, yes, to the extent that there's dislike of Huckabee on the conservative side, this could have come out from that side of things. But I mean, I think
Michelle Malkin immediately called it, Huckabee's Willie Horton. So it's
as Huckabee is one of the more pro-immigrant guys in the
right.
race.
It's not like the story didn't fit into the conservative blogger narrative as to why they don't like Huckabee. It was they. No,
but obviously when there's underlying motive to not like someone on their broader team, I think it's easier to jump on and drive it and try to force.
Oh yeah, no, I'm saying not only was there motive, but it fit into the overarching narrative as to why they don't like him. So it was kind of doubly assured that it was going to come to light.
But so my underlying point is that I think actual liberal media is maturing pretty rapidly. And here was a case where liberal media successfully injected a story into the mainstream media bloodstream, something they haven't been as capable of doing as well as conservative media has been able to do.
Oh, you'll get no argument from me there. I wrote a story right before I left for National Journal talking about, in part about the conservative, the liberal echo chamber and how it's grown and how it affects the debate. So they're definitely on the map and making waves.
And the one aspect of it that is more well discussed within the liberal blogosphere that doesn't get discussed as much, I think, even though the traditional media is covering it, and this has been Atrios' big point, that the drive to release Dumont came from conservative Clinton haters that concocted this very elaborate conspiracy theory that Wayne was railroaded because the rape victim was a distant cousin of Bill Clinton's. and the fact that such a conspiracy theory got as far as to the governor's mansion and led Huckabee to act on this guy's behalf is just very strange. And so you've seen allusions to it in traditional media. Even when Byron and York covered it for the National Review, he had a passing reference to it. But what this says about how liberal bloggers see the conservative machine, and again, a lot of liberal blogging comes out of a reaction to conservative attacks on Clinton in the 90s, that's a key part of a larger narrative that liberals have about the conservative movement.
But this wasn't Huckabee's only problem of the week. There was the NIE statement that he hadn't read it yet.
Yes. I'll cut him a touch of slack on that. I do know whenever you're traveling, you can lose sense of the minute by minute flow of the media.
Yeah, what it definitely showed was that he still has a very bare bones operation, and is not he doesn't have the staff of a Hillary Clinton or a Mitt Romney. The uncharitable way to say it is that he's still not ready for prime time.
Well, it certainly feeds that narrative. And that's, any time a second-tier candidate leaps into first tier, that's always the initial question on people's minds. Can he handle the pressure? Can he handle being in the crucible? Is he really primed to be president on day one? And when you have stumbles like that, right when that leap is made, you can fall back into the second tier very quickly.
His one of the comebacks he had was that, he's not terribly, proficient on foreign policy and doesn't have a lot of foreign policy experience, and then he tried to compare himself to, Ronald Reagan, who was governor of California, and so therefore didn't have a foreign policy experience, and that did not go over well in the conservative blogosphere. Powerline's Paul Marengoff, had a long post saying, Reagan was talking about the evils of the Soviet Union for years, and he said, Huckabee was much more closer to Jimmy Carter than to Ronald Reagan, and those are definitely fighting words if you're in a GOP primary.
He's even gone as far as to point out that Ronald Reagan raised taxes when he was governor and president to try to defend his own tax record in Arkansas. I imagine that's not being widely embraced by conservative bloggers.
You're right. You figured them out. But that really fits into the larger general antipathy that the conservative bloggers have for Huckabee. I think Jonah Goldberg sums it up nicely when he says Huckabee is compassionate conservatism on steroids. In that, the people at National Review never liked Bush's compassionate conservatism, and it always rubbed many conservative bloggers the wrong way. And they see in Huckabee with his nanny statism, his no smoking, his making sure the schools have all the right foods, everything else, just compassionate conservatism, like Jonah says, on steroids, and it's a big part of the reason why he's going over like a lead balloon in the blogosphere.
So it seems like within the conservative blogosphere, there's only one guy in the top 5 candidates who they dislike, being Huckabee.
Yeah.
The comfort level with McCain has grown.
Yes.
And Thompson and Romney and Giuliani were never really discounted by most of the conservative blogosphere. Is that accurate?
They all have people who hate them, but it's not like they're all generally acceptable.
But this does seem to be a Romney-Huckabee battle in Iowa right now.
Oh, it's in Iowa, it's Romney-Huckabee. But to kind of close it up here, or coming on 45 minutes, taking a macro look at the race, I've been saying for a while now, I don't know how much Iowa is really gonna matter. I mean, for Romney, it would be a killer. Romney's campaign was always a dot all the I's, cross all the T's campaign, and he has to win Iowa, and he has to win New Hampshire. But Giuliani, it was never that model, and neither with McCain. Although McCain does have to win New Hampshire, so it's not one of those things where for the Giulianis and McCains of the world, everything's going to come down to Iowa. Whereas on the Democratic side of the ticket, if Hillary wins Iowa, it's pretty much over.
I would agree with that, and one thing I got out of my interview with Bleeding Heartland as Des Moines Dem was that she senses that Clinton does not have a lot of interest amongst the undecided pool of Iowa voters. They're not really looking at her. They're looking more at Edwards, Obama, Richardson, etc. And polling already shows that she doesn't have a strong second choice layer of support, which is relevant in Iowa. So there's a possibility that she is somewhat maxing out, leaving a big opening for Edwards or Obama to overtake her. And if that does, I think you get a dogfight on the Democratic side. On the Republican side, if Romney wins Iowa, he has the money and the organization perhaps to drive that through Super Tuesday. If Huckabee wins Iowa, that's probably not as much true. You get more of a dogfight. Maybe Giuliani's super crazy wait till Florida strategy might actually work. Yeah,
we'll see. I think the wild card right now is whether McCain can come through in New Hampshire. Lots going on the Republican side. I have no idea what's going to happen. It's going to be very, very entertaining.
Well, good talk as always. Sorry if I rambled on too much at times.
Oh, no problem. We appreciated the Mormon theology lesson.
I just had to work that in.
Okay.
Mormon America. Bye.
There you go. Talk to you next week, Bill.
Take
Bye.
care.